It's 11 o'clock, so I'm going to start the webinar. Welcome everyone to another installment in the Holland Society's webinar series. We're really happy to welcome Zaskorski Associates, an architecture firm, to present on their restoration of the Van Wyck House in Douglaston, Long Island. They are a premier New York-based architectural practice dedicated to the art and science of working with existing buildings. And having had a preview of today's lecture, I am so impressed with the amazing work they did on the Van Wyck House. You're not here to hear me talk, so I'll turn it over to Carlo. Great. And we'll have about half an hour of the lecture and then a Q&A session at the end. So feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address them at the end of the talk. Thank you, Carlo.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation. We're honored, and we're very proud of our work. So here we are looking at the west elevation and the south elevation of the Van Wyck farmhouse in Douglaston, Queens. And what's important to keep in mind is that this is a historical building. It has tremendous historical importance in New York City history. So it really dates back, or it has a lineage to essentially the founding of New York by Dutch settlers. And so I'll just mention quickly a history of Dutch settlement in New York City to give just to give context. But before I do that, I would like to introduce Jason Gross, who's Senior Associate Architect, who was in charge of the project, and Jason Galindo, who is an architect and also marketing and graphics coordinator, and has put together this presentation. Also, Darian Fernando, who is a senior associate, an architect who specializes in historic preservation. So our work essentially is renovating existing buildings to a level of historic preservation. And so for us, it's not just the building, it's history, and the history is fantastic. And if one is a history buff of New York City, it's really it's just fantastic. So a quick rundown about how it is that the Dutch came to New York. Well, in 1609, Henry Hudson, who happened to be English, was sailing the Half Moon for the Dutch East India Company and looking for a Northwest Passage, which everybody was always looking for, the Northwest Passage to Asia. Sails up the Hudson River and comes back, and that initiates from 1610 to 1614 the first Dutch forays. Private Dutch voyages were initiated in order to barter with the Indians for beaver pelts. And beaver pelts apparently were very valuable and important. And so this went on until 1621. The Dutch West India Company was chartered, given an Atlantic trade monopoly, and their objective was trade, which was paramount, and therefore they established the colony. And their efforts were to have the colony settled and essentially for the colony to grow, all for the purpose of trade. And so 1625, 1626, New Amsterdam takes place. Several forts are built. Peter Minuet reports the purchase of that's the proverbial purchase of Manhattan. And then the Dutch culture essentially is established. So why is this important? Well, and what does it have to do with this house? Well, Johannes Bartens Van Wyck arrives in New Amsterdam in 1660, and he settles in what was called Midwood or Flatbush, and he is essentially the progenitor of the Van Wyck Queens line family history. And how is it that he came? Well, he came because Dutch West India Company was actively recruiting settlers to strengthen the colony and the population and the economy. And like many Dutch immigrants, Cornelius came because of the offer of land patents. The West India Company was giving away land. Also, there was a movement towards religious freedom. The Dutch culture in New York was very liberal, and so that is significant. Why? Because the land that the house was built on in Douglaston was purchased by Van Wicks from Richard Cornell. And so who was Richard Cornell? Richard Cornell was an Englishman, and he came, and he was a Quaker. So he came to New Amsterdam or to New York, or to at least the Manhattan area, for religious freedom. And he was relatively wealthy, so he was buying up land and ultimately owned extensive land in Rockaway, Queens. And he was the first European settler of Rockaway, and he became and he was the ancestor or progenitor of the Cornell family in Long Island, which ultimately spread to Queens and Westchester. And so, and he was the one who sold 125 acres of land to Cornelius Bartens Van Wyck when he came to this area in 1660. So his son Cornelius inherited this 125 acres, or actually, to be correct, the Van Wyck family at one time owned 215 acres of land in Douglaston. And an acre of land in Douglaston is probably worth about $1 million. So you can imagine, in today's world, you can imagine what that would have translated to. And so we studied this because it was important to understand the significance of this house, since it's one of the few remaining houses of Dutch construction and origin in Queens and in New York City. It is a designated landmark, New York City designated landmark, and it is also on the National Register of Historic Places. So it has tremendous historical significance. And so let's talk a little bit about the renovation and historic preservation of the house. Jason Gross, you want to talk a little bit about it?
Sure, we can. So the house that you're seeing on the screen now is what it looked like when we began. The original house, it was the 1735, and that was essentially 2 rooms downstairs and 1 room upstairs. The first room was sort of like a kitchen and washing area, and the second room was what they would refer to as the keeper room, is where you would go to keep warm. And that's where there was a large fireplace and the cooking was done in that area. So very modest. Upstairs was more of a living quarter, bedrooms, things like that. And then there was an attic. Around the 1780s, the house was enlarged, the area that you see toward the left, and they added 2 rooms additional downstairs and 2 more bedrooms upstairs. the house then became the clubhouse, well, first the gatehouse and then the clubhouse for the Douglaston estate. It was cited, according to lore, in this area because the local native people use shells as their currency. And this particular part of the bay was where most of the shells washed up. So when the Dutch Van Wyck family saw that, they wanted to collect the shells and to have a leg up on trade, and they put their house overlooking that particular area. The house, when it was owned by the Douglaston Association, became their gatehouse and then their clubhouse. And then in the 1920s, it was purchased, it was converted back to a residence, and it was purchased by a man who was working and trading in stocks. He undertook one of the earliest historic restoration projects back in the 20s, working with Frank Forrester to try to make the house look as it had in the 1780s. He did not do well in 1929, and he lost the house. It then was owned by the Larson family. They added a kitchen in 1930, in the 1930s, and they continued to live there for generations until our client purchased it. I'll let Carlo talk about the Dutch farmhouses that we also utilized for inspiration and to research what was appropriate.
So there are quite a few in the Dyckman House, the Van Cortlandt House, Onderdonk, Wyckoff houses that date back to New Amsterdam. And so we studied them all because we needed to design and construct a dormer to provide light and air and headroom for the second floor at the top of the stairs. That was very controversial. In today's world, on a New York City landmark building, extensive evaluation, presentation, and historical research has to be presented in order to get approval for any kind of a change like that, or so-called intervention, which we did gain. So at the time of working on the house, we found the island at the center of the world, which by Russell Shorto, which is the story of how of Dutch Manhattan and how that colony shaped the culture of America. So I would recommend that you read that. You'll enjoy it. It reads very well, and it's in the history of the Dutch history of Manhattan, and the influence in New York history is very, very interesting. One of the tenets of the book is that the Dutch established rules of or what preceded building code and zoning in what could be built in New Amsterdam for public safety, for sanitation, and it was one of the earliest and comprehensive building and zoning codes in the United States. Property lines were established, surveyors were authorized and certified, and this was very important in terms of urban design and city design. The New York City now, the zoning is thousands of pages, and building code is thousands of pages with all kinds of controls and regulations. And so here we are in what became known as Douglaston. Why is it called Douglaston? A fellow by the name of Douglas bought the entire peninsula, and the deal that he made was that it was going to be renamed Douglaston, and so it was. And so here's a snapshot of the beginning of our work. And in restoring a building to high quality and to a historic preservation level, you basically need to look at every square foot of the building in order to understand what the building needs and to correct it, and also to correct it faithfully in terms of it's the original design and intention. And so we found that the building had been neglected, and usually because of financial reasons or the owner's age. They just simply just can't deal with maintaining the building. So we had peeling paint, the siding, which was wooden shingles original to the building that were from 1735. You can imagine the condition. The structural system was failing because of sagging and inappropriate construction. So that had to be dealt with. Windows did not function and needed to be replaced. The roof leaked. The gutters were crumbling leaders. The foundation was in poor condition. The foundation was a rubble stone foundation, and much of the mortar was old and weak and turned to dust. And of course, to make the building livable, it needed comprehensive electrical replacement and comprehensive plumbing replacement. And also we found that the original plaster on wood lath was in very poor condition. There was no insulation. So consequently, as you'll see, there was a comprehensive repair and restoration. But at the same time, we had to pay attention to the historic materials. We had to consider very carefully all the work that we did. So here is an example of the structure. As you can see, it is rough hewn, what's known as post and beam, and mortise and tenon, which means that the diagonal section has a tongue that fits into the horizontal beam, and then it is attached with a wooden peg. And you can see that Roman numerals 1, 2, 3 on the two structural sections, so that the assembly could be cataloged and reassembled. So which means that the building was basically prefabricated off-site somewhere. Often it was prefabricated by shipwrights in those days. So here is the drone photograph of the restoration or repair or reconstruction of the cedar shingle roof. In colonial times, the enclosure or the outside skin of buildings was a very simple material. It was shingles. The roof was shingled and the exterior walls were shingled. And so this building had the original shingle roof, which was left in place and essentially rotted, and was covered with asphalt shingles. And so when we removed the asphalt shingles, which had failed, we were able to find remnants of the original 1735 wood shingles, which was pretty fantastic. So here you can see Actually, this is interesting because it's this is an existing, on the lower left is an existing dormer. Which we essentially, maintained and waterproofed and covered, with shingles. We worked very closely with, the Landmarks Preservation Commission and the preservationist, Richard Lowry, who was very, very experienced, very knowledgeable, and consequently, very, very, very easy to work with. And it turns out that he has a house in Bermuda that he's restoring, a historic house in Bermuda that he's restoring. So we were very, we were very much aligned, and in the same theme. So here we're matching colors from the original paint of the shutters, which we had to replace because they were completely rotted. Windows were replaced. They were replaced, essentially wood windows in kind, 6/6. We were, you can see here, finished roof. These are wood shakes. And then you can see the new shutters, and most of the original shingles we were able to keep. However, we did have to replace some, and that was a challenge because the replacements had to be faithful, and not noticeable. We installed new gutters, leaders, the exterior stone foundations were rubble, and the joints, mortar joints were cut and pointed. We analyzed the mortar in order to replicate what the original mortar was. That's very important in masonry restoration. It's the actual composition of the mortar is critical. This is a very old mortar, so consequently it had a large amount of lime, and not so much Portland cement, if any. And that this way it would allow the stone to actually flex and move slightly, and it wouldn't cause any of the stone to be damaged. We also needed to make this house livable, and so we were able to underpin the foundations at the interior of the house in order to gain several feet of headroom, so that the lower level or the basement could be habitable. We needed to make, this is a historic house, but it was not going to be a museum, and it needed, there was a substantial amount of cost dedicated, and the house had to be had to work. It had to be usable. So here you can see the original plank floors in the dining area were restored. Some partitions were eliminated. All the roof beams were maintained. All new electrical, all new plumbing. The exterior walls were insulated. New heating system, new air conditioning system, new plumbing, new finishes. And here you can see the dining room. From the fireplace beyond, the owner purchased a musket rifle of the period of the house. He was very pleased. He's very interested in the American Revolution. The house preceded it by 4 decades, essentially 1735 to 1776 was the American Revolution. So from a historical point of view, it's really consequential. Here you can see the original plank floors were restored very carefully. The owner has a Delft collection, and which he displayed in one of the rooms. In the course of the work, there was substantial amount of structural timber restoration using reclaimed wood. We worked very carefully with a structural engineer who's very experienced in historic preservation and dealing with existing buildings. There was a substantial amount of reinforcement of the structure. We needed to look at every square foot of the building from the outside, and we had to look at every square foot of the building from the inside, so that we could do what was necessary. You can see Jason Gross on the newly restored stair. The renovation took approximately 3 years of time, we're very pleased with the outcome. Here are the drawings that were presented to the Landmarks Commission and Department of Buildings, and were used for a contract with the builder. Here you see the roofing details, waterproofing, construction details, new stair, exterior patio was reconstructed, the stairs were reconstructed, windows were replaced, exterior was repaired, all the shingles were repaired, replaced as needed, and yet had to be done in such a way that it wasn't noticeable. There were some of the original drawings. Then there are modern aspects as waterproofing, sound control, and emergency generator, for instance. And so we've gotten comments from the Douglaston Community Board and their historic preservation board that were very positive. Everyone in the neighborhood is very pleased that the house was restored, and you know, its legacy is maintained, and its significance is maintained for all to see. Here's an example of the structural framing that was exposed, just so that one could see how the house was originally constructed. In the kitchen, you can see this, the kitchen cabinets. Kitchen was completely modernized. And so the house is very livable. And so, any questions?
First of all, thank you so much, Carlo. This was amazing. We do have one question so far, and I'll remind our attendees to please put any questions in the chat box. Someone would like to know, were the scallop style shingles the original style of the house?
Say that again?
Were the scallop style shingles
Yes,
the original
they were
style?
original to the house. We've never seen that before.
Yeah, they were probably installed in the late 18th century, the 1780 period, and most of them are about 3 feet long. And so what you see overlapping, they're about 4 layers behind. So they are all, you know, old growth French oak, wood, hardwood, and they form kind of like a thatched roof effect in the way that they keep the water out of the cavity of the wall. We were able to observe them all from the back without removing them. We replaced and repaired selectively, And of course, everything was painted, and then the wall cavities were insulated, and we were able to install vapor barriers, understanding, the appropriate dew point, because moisture can get through the wood, and we do not want, obviously, humidity within the wall cavity. So we carefully studied the construction of the shingles and how they function relative to the climate control that we were installing.
Amazing. Did you do any restoration in the cellar or discover any signs of enslavement in the building?
We did underpin the existing foundations, but we did not find other evidence.
No, that probably would have been removed during the period of time that the house functioned as a clubhouse or something. The cellars were pretty much barren, for the most part when we began. So there was really nothing. There was some, like, they weren't necessarily time capsules per se, but there were things left in the walls, old bottles, things like that, but mostly from the 1900s, not from the pre-revolutionary time.
What's important to know is that the New Amsterdam community was very, very liberal, and consequently, there were many African Americans, some of whom were enslaved and others that were not. And also, there was an opportunity for people who were enslaved to essentially work off their enslavement and become free, which was rare in terms of the U.S., the other parts of the U.S. And the English ruled cities, that was not possible. But this came up in discussion yesterday at the office, that there was enslavement in New York, and what its extent has been, and not very much has been written about it or very much studied. When the federal building was constructed in Lower Manhattan, there was an African burial ground that was discovered and then preserved. But as far as this house, we haven't, we researched the house as much as we could, and maybe there's more to be done, but we did not find any references.
Yeah, and we don't know of any other structures that would have existed on the estate. Clearly they're not there at this time. So it's possible that there were quarters for slaves and or servants, littered around the property at that time, but none survived, and nothing was recorded about them.
Thank you. And for those who are interested in learning more about enslavement, specifically within buildings in New Netherlands, I'd recommend Andrea Masterman's Spaces of Enslavement, which was published a few years ago. What are the another question, what are the dates for Cornelius Van Wyck? I assume he means that he lived in the house. Do you happen to know that?
So let's see. So the timeline of the Van Wyck family starts off with Cornelius Barents Van Wyck. He immigrates from Holland to Flatbush and Midwood. And then his son, Johannes, so Johannes was first generation. He buys 125 acres on Little Neck Bay. And then Johannes' son, Cornelius, 1735, he builds the house at 126 West Drive. And then in 1819, Cornelius's descendants sell the 125 acres to Winant Van Zandt. So the entire estate transfers out of the Van Wyck family to Winant Van Zandt in 1819. So Cornelius was 1735. Johannes was 1705, and Cornelius Bartens Van Wyck was 1660. That's when he arrives, 1660. No, 1652.
Great, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? I personally have a question. What did you find most surprising when you were taking the house apart to put it back together?
The amount of work that had to be done. We had to deconstruct the entire house and then reconstruct it. It was just a tremendous amount of work. Every square.
We were surprised to find that the construction that was done in the 1990s was of the worst quality and needed the most attention. There was a circular structural logic that one member was supporting another, which was supporting another and another and another, and then back to the original one.
Terrible.
So they hadn't really thought much about how to add on to this house in the past. So we had to figure that out by examining the original structure, knowing what was original, how it was modified, restore the original so that we could transfer the loads without having ongoing sagging of the joists and the floors. So yeah, finding that the modifications that were done most recently, probably without permits, were detrimental, and luckily we were able to intercede and set it right.
An interesting aspect of the historic restoration and essentially historic preservation is a wonderfully available resource, which is, if anyone is interested, it's the preservation briefs published by the National Park Service Technical Preservation Services. And the preservation briefs are free. They're available online to be downloaded. And they are publications which have to do with extremely detailed and substantive preservation, rehabilitation, restoration of historic buildings. And there are over 50 briefs, and each one deals with a particular aspect of historic preservation. For instance, the first is repointing mortar joints in historic masonry buildings. It's very extensive, and it's written by a very experienced architect, and it's extremely comprehensive. Another one is improving energy efficiency in historic buildings. Another one, roofing historic buildings, repair of historic wooden windows, exterior paint, historic woodwork, thermal upgrading, exterior additions to historic buildings, use of substitute materials in historic buildings. So if anyone wants to really understand how to work on and restore existing buildings, those briefs are extremely valuable. They're a complete university course in historic preservation. We consulted with 26 of the briefs out of the 50. Building codes for historic buildings, maintaining exteriors, small, medium-sized historic buildings, preparation and use of historic structure, controlling unwanted moisture, landscaping and management of historic landscapes. And so we found them to be very, very valuable. And also they helped us when with references that we could communicate to Landmarks Preservation Commission, to give credibility to whatever it was we were doing and proposing.
Well, thank you so much. This was so enjoyable. We really appreciate
Well,
you taking the time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Carlo
Thank
and
you for the
Jason and Jason.
opportunity, and we hope to see you soon.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for joining.